Behind the gleaming medals and inspiring speeches of the Invictus Games lies a story that palace insiders never wanted you to hear. When Prince Harry stepped onto that stage in front of wounded veterans from around the globe, he had no idea that a single moment would spark the biggest royal controversy since his explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey.
What started as a celebration of courage and resilience quickly transformed into a battlefield of royal protocol, family loyalty, and public perception. Expert commentators called it shocking and awkward, but the truth behind Harry's controversial gesture runs deeper than anyone imagined. This is the untold story of 5 critical days that changed everything. From the private phone calls between Montecito and Buckingham Palace, to the heated debates in royal circles, to the veterans who found themselves caught in the crossfire of a family feud that has captivated the world. The cameras captured the moment, but they missed the real story. Until now. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Invictus Games venue, as Prince Harry made his way through the crowd of wounded veterans, their families, and media personnel. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Veterans from 14 nations had gathered for what many considered the most important sporting event of their lives. Harry, dressed in a crisp navy suit, moved with the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. Yet there was something different about him today. Sarah Mitchell, a former royal correspondent who had covered the House of Windsor for over 2 decades, noticed it first. She was positioned near the media pen, her experienced eye trained on royal body language after years of reading between the lines of palace protocol. Something in Harry's demeanor seemed off, she would later tell colleagues. His usual easy smile appeared forced, and his handlers seemed more nervous than usual. The Invictus Games had always been Harry's baby. Created in 2014 as his vision for supporting wounded, injured and sick military personnel and veterans, the Games had become his greatest legacy outside of his royal duties. Even after stepping back from royal life and moving to California with Meghan, Harry had maintained his role as patron of the Games. This year's event in Germany was particularly significant, as it marked the largest gathering of veterans since the pandemic. Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson, a British Army veteran who had lost his leg in Afghanistan, was among the competitors that day. He had trained for months for this moment, not just for the physical competition, but for the chance to meet the prince who had created this platform for veterans like himself. Peterson had first heard about the Invictus Games while recovering in hospital, and Harry's vision had literally saved his life by giving him something to fight for. As the opening ceremony approached, palace officials in London were monitoring every detail. The relationship between the working royals and Harry remained strained following his departure from royal duties and subsequent revelations in interviews and his memoir. Every public appearance was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed for hidden meanings or potential controversies. King Charles III, still adjusting to his new role after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, had been particularly concerned about Harry's appearances at Invictus events. While he supported his son's work with veterans, the king worried about how Harry might use these platforms to air further grievances against the royal family. Palace insiders reported that Charles had specifically requested updates on Harry's speeches and public statements during the Games. The controversy began during what should have been a routine medal presentation ceremony. Harry was presenting awards to veterans who had excelled in the wheelchair basketball competition. The cameras were rolling, capturing what everyone expected to be another heartwarming moment of the prince honoring military heroes. Instead, they captured something that would dominate headlines for weeks. As Harry approached the podium to present the gold medal to Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a U.S. Marine who had lost both legs in an IED explosion in Iraq, he paused. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but to those watching carefully, it felt like an eternity. Instead of following the standard protocol of shaking hands and presenting the medal in the traditional manner, Harry did something unprecedented. He removed his own military medals from his jacket and placed them on the table beside Rodriguez's newly won gold medal. The gesture was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone familiar with royal protocol. In royal circles, military medals are sacred symbols of service and honor. They are never removed casually, and certainly never in such a public setting without prior approval from palace officials. Rodriguez looked confused for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The other veterans on stage exchanged glances, sensing that something significant had just occurred, though most couldn't quite grasp what. The media present began furiously taking notes and snapping photos, their instincts telling them they had just witnessed something important. Dr. Emily Thornton, a royal protocol expert and author of 3 books on monarchy traditions, was watching the ceremony live on television from her London office. She immediately recognized the significance of Harry's action and began making phone calls to media contacts. Within hours, her analysis would be broadcast across multiple networks, describing the gesture as unprecedented and potentially explosive. Back at the ceremony, Harry continued with the presentation as if nothing unusual had happened. He placed the medal around Rodriguez's neck, offered congratulations, and moved on to the next recipient. But the damage was done. The cameras had captured everything, and within minutes the footage was being analyzed by royal watchers around the world. Palace officials in London learned about the incident through social media before receiving official reports from their representatives at the Games. The speed at which the story spread caught everyone off guard. By the time Palace communication staff had a chance to develop a response strategy, speculation was already running wild across news networks and social media platforms. The reaction from veterans at the Games was mixed. Some, like Peterson, saw it as Harry showing solidarity with their struggles and sacrifices. Others felt uncomfortable with what they perceived as the prince using their ceremony to make a political statement. The division among the veteran community would become one of the most troubling aspects of the entire controversy. Meghan Markle, watching from their Montecito home via livestream, reportedly called Harry immediately after the ceremony. Sources close to the couple later revealed that she was concerned about the potential backlash and urged him to clarify his intentions quickly. However, Harry seemed surprised by the attention his gesture had received, apparently unaware of how it would be interpreted. The first media reports began appearing within hours of the ceremony. Initially, most outlets simply reported the facts of what had occurred, describing Harry's unusual gesture without extensive commentary. However, as royal experts began weighing in, the tone of coverage quickly shifted. Richard Pemberton, a former palace aide who had worked closely with Harry during his royal years, was among the first to publicly criticize the gesture. Speaking to the BBC later that evening, Pemberton described Harry's action as tone-deaf and unnecessarily provocative. He argued that the prince had turned what should have been a celebration of veteran achievement into a statement about his own grievances with the royal family. The international media picked up the story with varying degrees of sensationalism. American outlets, generally more sympathetic to Harry and Meghan, initially portrayed the gesture as touching and meaningful. British tabloids, predictably, took a harsher stance, with some describing it as a slap in the face to the royal family and military traditions. As the first day of controversy drew to a close, it became clear that this was not going to be a minor incident that would blow over quickly. The palace's initial silence only fueled more speculation, while Harry's team scrambled to develop an appropriate response. Veterans organizations began issuing statements, some supporting Harry's gesture, while others questioned its appropriateness at such an event. Social media exploded with opinions from all sides. Military families shared deeply personal stories about the meaning of medals and honors, while royal supporters debated whether Harry had crossed a line. The hashtag #Invictus controversy began trending worldwide, ensuring that the story would continue to dominate news cycles. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the already strained relationships within the royal family and force difficult questions about tradition, protocol, and the ongoing rift between Harry and his family. What had started as a simple medal ceremony had become the catalyst for a much larger conversation about the future of the monarchy and Harry's place within it. As night fell over the Invictus Games venue, security was increased around Harry following concerns about public reaction. The prince spent the evening in his hotel room, reportedly making phone calls to advisors and family members, trying to understand how a gesture he had intended as meaningful had instead ignited such fierce controversy. The veterans, meanwhile, found themselves thrust into the middle of a royal family drama they had never asked to be part of. Many had come to the Games seeking healing and camaraderie, only to find their achievement ceremony overshadowed by palace politics. Their reactions would prove crucial in shaping public opinion about Harry's controversial moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the palace prepared its official response and media coverage intensified. The gesture that had lasted only seconds would have consequences lasting far beyond the Games themselves, setting in motion events that would reshape how the public viewed Prince Harry and his relationship with the institution he had walked away from. The morning after Harry's controversial gesture dawned grey and stormy, both literally and figuratively. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was tense as senior staff gathered for an emergency meeting that had been called at 6 a.m. The palace had weathered many storms involving Harry over the past few years, but this incident felt different. It wasn't just about family drama anymore. It involved sacred military traditions and the veterans who had served their countries with honor. Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, and one of the most powerful figures in the royal household, led the meeting. A career diplomat with decades of experience managing royal crises, Alderton had hoped that Harry's departure from royal duties would reduce these early morning emergency sessions. Unfortunately, the opposite seemed to be true. Each time Harry appeared in public, there was potential for controversy. The communications team had been monitoring global media coverage throughout the night, and the reports were troubling. What had started as isolated criticism was now becoming a full-scale media storm. The story had been picked up by major news outlets in 17 countries, and the commentary was becoming increasingly harsh. Royal correspondents who had previously shown some sympathy for Harry's position were now questioning his judgment. Queen Camilla, who had developed a surprisingly warm relationship with Harry before his departure, was reportedly deeply concerned about the impact on the monarchy's reputation. Palace sources revealed that she had spoken with King Charles early that morning, urging him to handle the situation delicately. She understood better than most how easily royal controversies could spiral out of control and damage the institution permanently. The king himself was facing a particularly difficult situation. As a father, he wanted to support his son and understand his motivations.
As the monarch, he had to consider the impact on the crown and military relationships. Charles had spent his entire life preparing for the throne, and managing the fallout from Harry's actions was not how he had envisioned spending his early reign.
Meanwhile, at the Invictus Games venue, Harry was dealing with the immediate aftermath of his gesture. Veterans who had initially been excited to meet him now seemed uncertain about how to interact with him. The easy camaraderie that had always existed between Harry and military personnel felt strained. Some veterans avoided eye contact, while others seemed eager to show support, creating an uncomfortable division within the Games community. Captain Robert Davies, a Welsh Guards veteran who had lost his arm in Afghanistan, had been looking forward to competing in the cycling events. Instead, he found himself fielding questions from journalists about Harry's behavior. Davies, who had always respected the prince for his military service and support of veterans, felt caught between loyalty and confusion. He didn't understand what Harry had been trying to communicate, and he wasn't alone. The international nature of the Invictus Games complicated the situation further. Veterans from countries with different royal traditions and military cultures were struggling to understand why Harry's gesture was causing such controversy. Canadian and Australian competitors coming from Commonwealth nations had some understanding of royal protocol, but veterans from the United States, Germany, and other republics found the entire situation baffling. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a military psychologist who worked closely with wounded veterans, was present at the Games as part of the support staff. She began noticing concerning changes in the atmosphere. Veterans who had come to the Games seeking healing and community were instead finding themselves thrust into a media circus. Some were questioning whether they should speak to journalists, worried about saying the wrong thing and making the situation worse. The palace's response strategy was complicated by the fact that Harry was no longer a working royal. Traditional palace protocol didn't clearly apply to his actions, yet his continued use of his royal title and his connection to the Games meant that his behavior still reflected on the monarchy. The communications team found themselves in uncharted territory. By midday, the pressure for an official response had become overwhelming. News networks were running continuous coverage of the story, with royal experts offering increasingly dramatic interpretations of Harry's gesture. Some suggested it was a deliberate insult to the king and the military. Others theorized that it represented Harry's final break from royal tradition. The speculation was becoming more harmful than helpful. The decision was made to issue a brief statement that would acknowledge the situation without inflaming tensions further. The statement, released through official royal channels, simply noted that the king continues to support the important work of the Invictus Games and the veterans they serve. It was deliberately neutral, neither defending nor criticizing Harry's actions. However, the palace's restrained response only seemed to fuel more speculation. Media outlets interpreted the careful wording as evidence of deep displeasure within the royal family. The lack of explicit support for Harry was seen as significant, even though palace officials had intended the statement to be diplomatic rather than critical. The situation became more complicated when several senior military officials began speaking publicly about the incident. General Sir Patrick Sanders, the Chief of the General Staff, was asked about Harry's gesture during a previously scheduled press conference about military recruitment. His response was measured but telling.
Military honors and decorations represent the ultimate sacrifice and service to one's country.
They should be treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. While Sanders didn't mention Harry by name, his comments were widely interpreted as a rebuke of the prince's actions. The fact that such a senior military figure felt compelled to address the situation publicly indicated just how seriously the incident was being taken within defense circles. Veterans organizations began releasing their own statements throughout the day.
The responses varied dramatically, reflecting the complex feelings many veterans had about Harry and his role in their community. The Royal British Legion issued a diplomatic statement praising Harry's continued support for veterans, while subtly emphasizing the importance of respecting military traditions. However, smaller veterans groups were less diplomatic. Forces Watch, an organization representing younger veterans, released a statement questioning whether Harry's gesture was appropriate at an event meant to celebrate veteran achievements rather than personal political statements. Their criticism stung because it came from the very community Harry claimed to be supporting. The media coverage began to focus on the division Harry's gesture had created within the veteran community. News programs featured segments with veterans arguing on both sides of the issue. Some praised Harry for showing solidarity and breaking down barriers between royalty and military personnel. Others felt he had disrespected traditions that were sacred to military culture. Lieutenant Sarah Thompson, a Royal Navy veteran who had competed in previous Invictus Games, found herself reluctantly defending Harry on television. She argued that the Games had always been about breaking down barriers and challenging traditional approaches to veteran support. However, she also acknowledged that Harry's timing and method had been problematic. The international dimension of the story continued to evolve throughout the day. American media outlets, initially sympathetic to Harry, began to question his judgment as more details emerged about the significance of his gesture in British military culture. The New York Times ran a lengthy analysis piece explaining royal protocol and military traditions to American readers, helping them understand why the incident was causing such controversy. Social media activity reached fever pitch as hashtags related to the controversy trended worldwide. #SupportHarry and #RespectTradition became rallying cries for opposing sides of the debate. The online discussion often devolved into broader arguments about monarchy, military culture, and modern versus traditional values. Perhaps most concerning for palace officials was the international diplomatic dimension that was beginning to emerge. Several Commonwealth nations had veterans participating in the Games, and their governments were being asked to comment on the royal family situation. The last thing the new king needed was a diplomatic crisis sparked by his son's actions at a veteran support event. As the second day of controversy drew to a close, it became clear that the situation was far from resolved. The palace's measured response had failed to calm the storm, and Harry's continued silence was being interpreted as either defiance or uncertainty. The veteran community remained divided, and media coverage showed no signs of subsiding. Palace insiders began to worry that the controversy was overshadowing the actual purpose of the Invictus Games. The stories of veteran courage and resilience that should have been dominating headlines were being pushed aside by royal family drama. This shift in focus was particularly troubling because it affected the very people the Games were meant to support. The king faced increasing pressure to take a more definitive stance. Some advisors urged him to publicly distance himself from Harry's actions to protect the monarchy's relationship with the military. Others argued that any criticism of Harry would only deepen family divisions and create more headlines. The delicate balance between family loyalty and royal duty had never been more challenging to navigate. By the third day of the controversy, the media landscape had transformed into a battlefield of expert opinions, each more dramatic than the last. Television studios across Britain were filled with royal commentators, military historians and protocol experts, all attempting to decode the deeper meaning behind Harry's controversial gesture. The analysis had moved far beyond the simple facts of what occurred, evolving into complex interpretations of royal psychology, family dynamics, and institutional politics. Dame Helena Morrison, the former editor of Majesty magazine and one of Britain's most respected royal experts, appeared on BBC's flagship morning programme with a scathing assessment of Harry's behaviour. Morrison, who had covered the royal family for over 30 years and had previously defended Harry during his more difficult moments, seemed to have reached her breaking point. Her words would become some of the most quoted of the entire controversy. "This gesture was not just awkward," Morrison declared, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "It was shocking in its disregard for everything the monarchy represents. Prince Harry has taken a ceremony meant to honour wounded veterans and turned it into a platform for his personal grievances against his family. It's beyond inappropriate. It's deeply selfish." Morrison's criticism carried particular weight because of her previously sympathetic coverage of Harry's struggles within the royal system. Her transformation from defender to critic represented a broader shift in media opinion that palace officials noted with relief and Harry supporters watched with growing concern. The television appearance sparked immediate reaction across social media and prompted responses from other royal experts who had been more measured in their initial assessments. Professor David Starkey, the controversial historian known for his provocative opinions about the monarchy,
went even further in his criticism during a radio interview later that morning. Starkey's analysis was typically dramatic but provided historical context that helped viewers understand why the gesture was so significant. In the entire history of the British monarchy, Starkey explained, we have never seen a member of the royal family publicly remove military honours in such a manner. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what those medals symbolise. They are not personal accessories to be discarded for effect. They represent the Crown's relationship with the military and, by extension, with the nation itself. The expert commentary was having a tangible effect on public opinion, as evidenced by polling data that began emerging throughout the day. A YouGov poll conducted exclusively for The Times showed that public support for Harry had dropped to its lowest level since his departure from royal duties. More concerning for Harry's reputation was the fact that the drop was most pronounced among military families and veterans, the very demographic he claimed to champion. The polling revealed troubling divisions within British society. While younger respondents were more likely to view Harry's gesture as symbolic solidarity with veterans, older respondents saw it as disrespectful to military traditions. The generational divide reflected broader tensions about modernisation versus tradition that had plagued the monarchy for decades. International expert opinion was equally divided, but often more sympathetic to Harry. Dr. Rebecca Hamilton, an American professor of royal studies at Georgetown University, appeared on CNN to offer a different perspective. She argued that Harry's gesture should be understood within the context of his traumatic experiences within the royal system and his efforts to create a more authentic relationship with the veteran community. Hamilton's analysis highlighted the cultural differences in how the gesture was being interpreted around the world. In American culture, she explained, we might see this as a powerful moment of vulnerability and connection. The fact that it's causing such controversy in Britain reveals something important about the rigid nature of royal protocol and the challenges facing anyone trying to modernize these ancient institutions. However, even sympathetic international experts acknowledged the problematic timing and execution of Harry's gesture. Professor Marie-Claude Fontaine, a specialist in constitutional monarchy at the Sorbonne, noted that Harry's good intentions were undermined by his apparent failure to consider the broader implications of his actions. The controversy was also drawing in military experts who normally avoided royal family discussions. Colonel James Mitchell, a decorated Afghanistan veteran and military analyst for Sky News, provided crucial insight into how serving military personnel were reacting to the incident. His perspective was particularly valuable because he understood both military culture and media dynamics. Mitchell's assessment was nuanced but ultimately critical of Harry's judgment. The Prince's service in Afghanistan was exemplary, and his work with veterans through Invictus has been genuinely transformative, Mitchell acknowledged. However, this gesture has created unnecessary division within the military community at a time when we should be united in supporting wounded veterans. Whatever message Harry intended to send, the impact has been divisive rather than unifying. The expert commentary was also revealing interesting details about the internal dynamics of the royal family that had previously been speculation. Royal biographer Andrew Morton, who had written extensively about both Diana and Harry, appeared on multiple programs throughout the day, offering insights into Harry's psychological state and his relationship with royal traditions. Morton suggested that Harry's gesture reflected his ongoing struggle to reconcile his royal identity with his desire for authentic expression. Harry has always been torn between his duty to the crown and his need to be genuine, Morton explained. This gesture appears to be another attempt to bridge that gap, but it demonstrates how difficult it is to navigate royal protocol when you're operating outside the traditional system. The psychological analysis was extending beyond Harry to examine the broader royal family dynamics. Dr. Susan Crawford, a family therapist who had written about high-profile family conflicts, suggested that the controversy revealed deep, unresolved issues between Harry and his family that were being played out in public forums. Crawford's analysis focused on the communication patterns within the royal family, noting that the palace's restrained response to Harry's gesture might actually be escalating tensions rather than diffusing them. Silence can be interpreted as disapproval or dismissal, she explained. If the family isn't communicating directly about these issues, they're likely to continue manifesting in public ways. The expert commentary was also exploring the institutional implications of the controversy. Constitutional expert Professor Vernon Bogdanor appeared on Newsnight to discuss how Harry's actions might affect the monarchy's relationship with the military and the Commonwealth nations. His analysis was particularly sobering for palace officials concerned about long-term institutional damage. Bogdanor noted that the military relationship was fundamental to the monarchy's constitutional role and public legitimacy. The Crown's connection to the armed forces is not ceremonial decoration. he explained. It represents the monarch's role as head of state and commander-in-chief.
Any action that appears to diminish respect for military traditions potentially weakens the entire constitutional structure. The international expert analysis was revealing how differently the controversy was being perceived in various countries. Commonwealth nations with strong military traditions, such as Canada and Australia, were treating the story seriously, while Republican nations, like France and Germany, viewed it more as entertainment than genuine constitutional concern. Philip Murphy, director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, noted that Harry's gesture was causing particular difficulty in Commonwealth nations where respect for British royal traditions remains strong. The monarch is head of state in 15 Commonwealth realms, Murphy explained.
Actions that appear to disrespect royal military traditions can have diplomatic implications far beyond Britain itself. The expert analysis was also beginning to examine the impact on the Invictus Games themselves. Sports psychologist Dr.
Lisa Reynolds, who had worked with Paralympic athletes, expressed concern about how the controversy was affecting veteran competitors. Her insights provided a crucial perspective that had been largely overlooked in the political and constitutional analysis. Reynolds explained that many Invictus competitors were dealing with significant trauma and mental health challenges, and the media circus surrounding Harry's gesture was creating additional stress during what should have been a healing experience. These veterans came to compete and connect with others who understand their struggles, she said. Instead, they're being asked to take sides in a royal family dispute that has nothing to do with their personal journeys. The psychological impact on veterans was becoming a significant part of the story, as more competitors and their families began speaking to media outlets. Many expressed frustration that their achievements were being overshadowed by royal drama, while others felt pressured to defend or criticize Harry's actions when all they wanted was to focus on their sport and recovery. As expert analysis continued throughout the day, it became clear that the controversy was evolving beyond a simple protocol breach into a complex examination of modern monarchy, military culture, family dynamics, and media responsibility. The original gesture had lasted seconds, but the analysis was revealing fundamental tensions that had been building for years. The sheer volume and intensity of expert commentary was also raising questions about media coverage itself. Some critics suggested that the extensive analysis was disproportionate to the actual significance of Harry's gesture, while supporters argued that any action by a royal family member deserved thorough examination. Television producers noted record viewing figures for royal-related programming, suggesting that public interest in the controversy remained high despite growing criticism of excessive coverage. The story had all the elements that drove modern media consumption: celebrity drama, political intrigue, cultural conflict, and genuine uncertainty about outcomes. As the third day of intensive expert analysis drew to a close, it was clear that opinions were hardening on all sides rather than finding middle ground. The controversy had become a lens through which broader cultural and political divisions were being examined, making resolution increasingly difficult to achieve. The fourth day of the controversy brought the most heartbreaking development yet. The veterans themselves began speaking out about how the royal drama was affecting their experience at the games they had trained months or even years to attend. What emerged from their testimonies painted a picture of dedicated military personnel who had overcome incredible physical and psychological challenges, only to find themselves unwilling participants in a media circus that had nothing to do with their athletic achievements or personal journeys. Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, a U.S. Army veteran who had lost her sight to an improvised explosive device in Iraq, had been preparing for the Invictus Games swimming competition for 18 months. Her training regimen had been grueling, requiring her to relearn swimming techniques without sight, while managing ongoing treatment for traumatic brain injury. She had viewed the Games as the culmination of her recovery journey, a chance to prove that her injuries had not defined her limitations. Instead, Walsh found herself surrounded by journalists asking for her opinion on royal protocol and family dynamics, about which she knew nothing and cared even less. "I didn't come here to be part of someone else's family drama," Walsh told a reporter from The Guardian, her voice carrying the frustration that many veterans were feeling. "I came here to swim fast and maybe win a medal for my country. Now every conversation is about Prince Harry and what his gesture meant. It's not fair to us." Walsh's sentiments were echoed by dozens of other competitors who had expected to spend their time at the Games focusing on sport, camaraderie, and healing. The media attention surrounding Harry's gesture was creating an environment where veterans felt pressured to take sides on issues completely unrelated to their reasons for participating in the competition. The psychological impact was particularly severe for veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health challenges.
Dr. Michael Torres, a psychiatrist specializing in military mental health who was working with the game's medical team, noted a significant increase in anxiety and stress-related symptoms among competitors following the controversy. Torres explained that many veterans had structured their recovery around the goal of competing at Invictus, viewing it as a milestone in their healing process.
The unexpected media scrutiny and pressure to comment on royal family issues was triggering stress responses that could potentially undo months of therapeutic progress.
These athletes have worked incredibly hard to get here, Torres said.
The last thing they need is additional psychological pressure from sources completely unrelated to their sport. The situation was particularly difficult for British veterans, who found themselves caught between their respect for the royal family and their gratitude to Harry for creating the Invictus Games. Corporal David Matthews, who had lost both legs below the knee in Afghanistan, exemplified this conflict. Matthews had credited Harry's visit to his hospital bed during his recovery with inspiring him to rebuild his life around sport and service to other veterans. Matthews found himself in the impossible position of being asked to choose between defending Harry and respecting royal traditions he had been raised to honor. "Harry saved my life," Matthews told BBC Radio, his voice cracking with emotion. "When I was lying in that hospital bed thinking I had nothing left to live for, he sat with me and talked about possibilities I couldn't even imagine. But this gesture, I don't understand it, and I don't want to have to explain it or defend it. I just want to compete." The international veterans were struggling with different but equally challenging dynamics. Many came from countries where royal protocol was unfamiliar, making it difficult for them to understand why Harry's gesture had caused such controversy. They found themselves trying to educate journalists about their own backgrounds and achievements, while simultaneously being asked to weigh in on British constitutional matters. Captain Lisa Schmidt, a German Bundeswehr veteran competing in wheelchair racing, expressed bewilderment at the situation during a press conference that was supposed to focus on her training techniques. "I am here because I am fast in my racing chair," Schmidt said through a translator. "I do not understand why you want to know my opinion about British Prince and his family. This is not why I came to these games." The veteran confusion was compounded by the fact that many competitors had limited media experience and felt unprepared to navigate the complex political and cultural questions they were suddenly facing. Most had expected interviews to focus on their athletic achievements and recovery stories, not constitutional law and royal family dynamics. The coaching staff and support personnel were also struggling to manage the situation. Team officials who had planned to spend their time focusing on athletic performance and veteran welfare instead found themselves trying to shield their athletes from persistent media inquiries about topics completely outside their expertise. British team manager Colonel Sarah Henderson, herself a veteran with extensive experience in military public relations, described the situation as unprecedented in her career. "In 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like this," Henderson explained. "We have world-class athletes here who have overcome incredible challenges to compete at the highest level, and instead of talking about their achievements, we're fielding questions about royal protocol. It's deeply frustrating and unfair to them." The impact on veteran families was equally significant. Many competitors had brought spouses, children, and parents to witness what they expected to be a celebration of recovery and achievement. Instead, family members found themselves approached by journalists seeking quotes about royal family relationships and military traditions. Maria Santos, whose husband was competing in the powerlifting competition after losing his arm in a training accident, described feeling ambushed by reporters who seemed more interested in royal gossip than her husband's remarkable recovery story. "My husband has worked so hard to get here," Santos said. "He's lifted weights every day for 2 years to build the strength to compete at this level. But nobody wants to talk about that. They just want to know what we think about the prince's behavior." The veteran response to the controversy also revealed important divisions within the military community that extended far beyond opinions about Harry's specific gesture. Generational differences in attitude toward authority, tradition, and institutional respect were becoming apparent as younger and older veterans reacted differently to the situation. Staff Sergeant Robert Kim, a Korean War veteran in his 80s who was participating in the archery competition, represented the traditional military view that royal and military protocols should be respected regardless of personal feelings. "In my day, you showed respect for the chain of command and military traditions," Kim explained. "What the prince did may have been well-intentioned, but it wasn't appropriate for that setting." Conversely, many younger veterans saw Harry's gesture as authentic and meaningful, even if poorly timed. Lance Corporal Ashley Rodriguez, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before losing her leg to an IED, appreciated what she saw as Harry's attempt to break down barriers between royalty and regular military personnel.
He was trying to show us that he understands we're all in this together, Rodriguez said. Maybe it wasn't the right time or place, but I respect what he was trying to do. The generational divide among veterans was creating additional tension within teams and support groups that had previously been unified around shared military experience and commitment to recovery through sport. Heated discussions about tradition versus authenticity were breaking out in dining halls and training facilities, dividing veterans who had come to the game seeking unity and understanding. Veterans advocacy organizations were also struggling to respond appropriately to the situation. Many had strong relationships with Harry and credited him with significantly improving support for wounded military personnel. However, they also had to consider the views of their broader membership, which included veterans with more traditional views about military protocol and royal respect. The Royal British Legion, Britain's largest veterans organisation, found itself in a particularly difficult position. The organisation had worked closely with Harry on numerous projects and genuinely appreciated his contribution to veteran welfare. However, many Legion members were critical of his gesture and expected the organisation to take a stronger stance. Legion Director General Charles Byrne attempted to thread the needle with a carefully worded statement that praised Harry's overall contribution, while acknowledging concerns about the specific incident. Prince Harry's work with wounded veterans has been transformative and deeply appreciated, Byrne said. However, we understand that some of our members have concerns about recent events, and we encourage continued dialogue about the best ways to honour military service and tradition. International veterans organisations faced their own challenges in responding to the controversy. Many had limited understanding of British royal protocol, but didn't want to appear insensitive to the concerns of their British counterparts. The result was often diplomatic statements that satisfied no one, while highlighting the cultural complexities involved in the international veteran community. Perhaps most troubling was the impact on veterans who were competing in the Invictus Games for the first time. Many had overcome significant psychological barriers to participate in such a public event, and the unexpected media attention was overwhelming their ability to cope with the pressure. Dr. Patricia Williams, a sports psychologist working with first-time competitors, reported that several athletes were considering withdrawing from their events rather than continue dealing with the media circus. These veterans have shown incredible courage just by getting here, Williams explained. For some, competing in public is more terrifying than anything they faced in combat. The last thing they need is additional stress from issues completely unrelated to their athletic goals. The coaching staff began implementing protective measures to shield vulnerable athletes from media pressure. But the damage was already being done. Training schedules were disrupted, mental preparation was compromised, and the supportive atmosphere that was supposed to characterize the games was being replaced by tension and uncertainty. As the fourth day of controversy concluded, it became clear that the real victims of Harry's gesture were not the royal family or military traditions, but the very veterans the Invictus Games were designed to support. Their voices and experiences were being drowned out by political and cultural debates that had nothing to do with their remarkable journeys of recovery and achievement. The fifth and final day of the controversy began with an unexpected development that would reshape the entire narrative. Prince Harry himself finally broke his silence. After 4 days of mounting pressure, expert analysis, and growing concern about the impact on veterans, Harry released a statement that was simultaneously an explanation, an apology, and a plea to refocus attention on the game's original purpose. The statement came not through traditional palace channels or media interviews, but through a video message posted on the official Invictus Games social media accounts at dawn, timed to reach global audiences as they began their day. Harry appeared tired but determined, sitting in what appeared to be a quiet corner of his hotel room, dressed casually in an Invictus Games t-shirt rather than his usual formal attire. His words were carefully chosen but delivered with evident emotion. I want to address the events of the past few days because they have distracted from what should be the focus of our time here. The incredible courage and determination of the veterans competing in these games. Harry began, looking directly into the camera with an intensity that immediately commanded attention. Harry's explanation of his gesture was both simpler and more complex than the elaborate interpretations that had dominated expert analysis for days. He revealed that his action had been spontaneous, inspired by a conversation with Sergeant Rodriguez the evening before the ceremony. Rodriguez had expressed feeling uncomfortable with the attention her medal ceremony would receive, worried that her achievements were somehow less significant than the prince's presence at the event. Maria told me she felt like an imposter, that people would be watching me instead of celebrating her incredible achievement. Harry continued, his voice breaking slightly. In that moment during the ceremony, I wanted her to know that her medal, her sacrifice, her courage were what mattered. I removed my medals not to disrespect military tradition, but to show that her honor was more important than mine. The personal explanation reframed the entire controversy in a way that none of the expert analysis had anticipated. Rather than a calculated political gesture or unconscious act of rebellion against royal protocol, Harry's action emerged as an impulsive attempt at personal connection that had been misunderstood due to cultural and institutional contexts he had failed to consider. Harry's statement continued with a direct apology that acknowledged the unintended consequences of his gesture. I realize now that my actions, however well-intentioned, created exactly the kind of distraction and division that these games were designed to overcome. To the veterans whose stories have been overshadowed by this controversy, I am deeply sorry. To those who felt my gesture was inappropriate or disrespectful to military traditions, I understand your concerns and share your commitment to honoring military service. The apology was notable for its specificity and lack of defensiveness. Harry didn't attempt to justify his action or blame others for misunderstanding his intentions. Instead, he took full responsibility for the impact of his gesture and explicitly acknowledged the validity of criticism from military communities and royal protocol experts. Perhaps most significantly, Harry announced that he would be stepping back from public appearances for the remainder of the Games, allowing the focus to return entirely to the competing veterans. The athletes here have trained for months or years for this opportunity, he said. They deserve to have their achievements celebrated without distraction. I will continue to support the Games from behind the scenes, but the spotlight should be on them, not on me. The immediate reaction to Harry's statement was mixed but generally more positive than the response to his original gesture. Veterans competing in the Games expressed relief that the focus might finally return to athletic competition and personal achievement. Many appreciated Harry's recognition of how the controversy had affected them and his decision to reduce his public profile for the remainder of the event. Sergeant Rodriguez herself appeared later that morning for her first media interview since the controversy began. Her perspective provided crucial insight into the personal dynamic that had motivated Harry's gesture. I told him I was nervous about all the attention, Rodriguez explained to CNN. I never expected him to do what he did, but I understand now that he was trying to help me feel more comfortable. It wasn't about politics or protocol. It was about kindness. Rodriguez's account humanized both Harry and herself in ways that shifted public perception of the entire incident. The image of a wounded veteran expressing insecurity about her worthiness and a prince trying clumsily to reassure her resonated with audiences who had been viewing the controversy through political and institutional lenses. The royal family's response to Harry's statement was swift and carefully crafted. King Charles released a brief comment through palace channels, expressing support for both Harry's work with veterans and his decision to step back from public appearances to allow the Games to continue without distraction. The response struck a balance between family loyalty and institutional propriety that had been missing from earlier palace communications. The king appreciates Prince Harry's clarification of his intentions and his continued commitment to supporting wounded veterans, the palace statement read. His Majesty looks forward to the successful conclusion of the Invictus Games and the celebration of veteran achievement that has always been their primary purpose. The statement was notable for its warmth compared to earlier palace responses and suggested that direct communication between Harry and his father had occurred behind the scenes. Palace insiders later confirmed that Charles had spoken with Harry by telephone shortly before the video statement was released, indicating that family relationships remained functional despite the public controversy. Media coverage began to shift dramatically following Harry's statement and the palace response. Expert commentators who had spent days analyzing the gesture through political and constitutional frameworks suddenly found themselves discussing family dynamics, communication failures, and the challenges of good intentions producing unintended consequences. Dame Helena Morrison, whose shocking assessment had become one of the most quoted criticisms of Harry's gesture, appeared on television again to respond to his explanation. Her tone was notably different, reflecting the impact of Harry's personal account and Rodriguez's humanizing perspective. While I maintain that the gesture was inappropriate for that setting, Morrison said, I appreciate Prince Harry's honesty about his motivations and his recognition of the impact on veterans. This explanation changes the context significantly. The veteran community's response to Harry's statement was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing appreciation for his acknowledgement of how the controversy had affected them. Training facilities and competition venues reported a noticeable improvement in atmosphere as athletes and support staff felt permission to focus on sport rather than politics. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, who had been struggling with divided loyalties throughout the controversy, summed up the feelings of many veterans. Harry made a mistake, but his heart was in the right place. What matters now is that we can get back to what we came here to do: compete, support each other, and show the world what wounded veterans are capable of achieving. The international media coverage also began to evolve, with many outlets shifting from constitutional analysis to human interest stories about the veterans and their achievements. The personal explanation of Harry's gesture had provided closure that allowed journalists to redirect attention to the athletic competitions and recovery stories that were supposed to be the game's primary focus. Sports coverage increased significantly over the final days of the games, with major networks dedicating more time to competition results and athlete profiles. Veterans who had been frustrated by the lack of attention to their achievements finally began receiving the recognition they had trained so hard to earn. The controversy's resolution also had broader implications for royal family relationships and public perception. Polling conducted after Harry's statement showed improved public opinion compared to the immediate aftermath of his gesture. While many Britons still viewed his action as inappropriate, his willingness to acknowledge mistakes and prioritize veteran welfare over personal pride was generally well received. International opinion was even more positive, with American and Canadian media particularly praising Harry's response to criticism. The contrast between his handling of this controversy and some of his previous public relations challenges was noted by royal watchers as evidence of personal growth and better judgment. The Invictus Games concluded with a closing ceremony that was notably more focused on veteran achievement than previous year's events. Harry attended but maintained a low profile, watching from the audience rather than taking a prominent platform role. His presence was acknowledged but not emphasized, allowing veteran speakers and athletes to dominate the program. The final medal tallies and competition results received extensive coverage that had been missing during the earlier days of royal controversy. Veterans who had been frustrated by the lack of attention to their achievements finally received recognition for months or years of training and preparation. The long-term impact of the controversy on the Invictus Games organization was generally positive, despite the temporary disruption. The intense media coverage had actually increased global awareness of the Games and veteran issues, potentially benefiting future competitions and fundraising efforts. Harry's role with the Games evolved subtly following the controversy. While he remained patron and continued his behind-the-scenes work, he adopted a less prominent public profile that allowed veterans to take center stage. The change was welcomed by many in the veteran community who felt the Games had sometimes become too focused on royal celebrity rather than athletic achievement. The royal family relationships appeared to stabilize following the incident, with both Harry and the palace demonstrating more effective crisis management than in previous controversies. The direct communication between father and son and the coordinated response to Harry's statement suggested improved family dynamics despite ongoing differences. Expert analysis of the incident's resolution focused on the importance of personal accountability and authentic communication in crisis management. Harry's willingness to explain his motivations, acknowledge unintended consequences, and change his behavior was contrasted favorably with more defensive responses to previous controversies. The incident became a case study in how good intentions can produce negative consequences when cultural and institutional contexts are not adequately considered. Harry's gesture, motivated by genuine concern for a veteran's comfort, had created exactly the kind of distraction and division he had hoped to prevent. The lasting legacy of the controversy was ultimately positive for the veteran community, as the intense media attention had highlighted both their achievements and the ongoing challenges they faced. The Games received record donations and volunteer applications following the coverage, suggesting that the temporary disruption had produced long-term benefits for veteran support. As the Games concluded and participants returned to their home countries, the consensus among veterans was that the controversy had been unfortunate but not damaging to the Games' fundamental mission. The focus on royal protocol and family dynamics had been distracting, but Harry's response had ultimately reinforced the Games' commitment to putting veterans first. The incident would be remembered as a learning experience for both Harry and the royal family about the complexities of public service in the modern media environment. The resolution demonstrated that even serious controversies could be managed effectively through honest communication, personal accountability, and a willingness to prioritize service over ego. The veterans, meanwhile, returned home with their medals, their stories, and their sense of achievement intact. In the end, that was what mattered most.